You don't sound convinced. Let's try that again. Good morning.
Good morning.
Very good. Thank you all for coming this morning. Yesterday I spoke about creation days 1 and 2. And this morning I'm going to build on that and talk about days 3 and 4. And as before, I just have text up here. I'm going to start with I think this is the New American Standard. Then God said, "Let the waters below the heavens be gathered into one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. Now notice talking about the land, the water below the heavens. We spoke yesterday about the fact that there was this rakia, this expanse that God made on day 2, and it divided the waters vertically. There's water below and water above, and I shared with you my conviction now, and I'm moving towards this belief that I think perhaps the universe is surrounded by water. If this is what the text clearly is talking about, and I think it might be, that's the inescapable conclusion I come to. Well, at this point, the Lord goes back down and focuses attention not on the waters above, but on the waters below the heavens. And he says, "Gather together in one place." And this, of course, is referring to a body of water or bodies of water on the earth. But notice it says he wants them to be gathered together into one place. Are the waters on the earth in one place today? No. On the west of Africa, you have the Atlantic Ocean. To the east, you have the Indian Ocean. They're kind of connected a bit. But then you go farther east and you have the Pacific Ocean, and in between that you've got the Americas, and that pretty much divides the Atlantic and Pacific. They're only connected really in a very narrow inlet. And you've got other inlets around. It seems like the surface of the earth, the land and the water, are separated quite a bit. But the description of the waters below here would suggest that there was perhaps one ocean at one time. And one initial creation, one sort of ocean. And if there's one ocean, then that would suggest that there was one landmass as well, the dry land being one continent. And what's interesting is that in the last 50, 60 years, secular geologists have come to the conclusion that sometime in the past, there was one continent. They called it Pangaea. They try to argue that prior to that, the continent, what they say is that for billions of years, the continents have been shuffling around. You had a big supercontinent, and it pulled apart, and it came back together again, and pulled apart, and came back together again. They have the most recent version being Pangaea. They try to argue that there was this place called Gondwanaland much earlier than that, though the evidence for it is fragmentary at best. Well, I'm not a geologist, but I work with geologists. In fact, my boss at Answers in Genesis is Andrew Snelling. He is one of the most respected creation geologists in the world today. And he and others that I talked to are of the opinion that there was probably one large continent, and that continent we can probably identify with what secular geologists call Pangaea. We have no trouble with there being a Pangaea at one time. In fact, it fits very nicely with the biblical narrative of the ocean being in one place and the land being in another place. And it's our belief that at the time of the flood, and some other people will talk about that later on, this large supercontinent broke apart. And what we have today are the pieces of that supercontinent. But you can kind of, if you go push them back, you can kind of put pieces together into one large piece. So the secular geologists may have come up with this 60 years ago, but on the other hand, it is consistent with what we see in the Bible, and that's the way creation geologists now interpret this. And it goes on in the next verse, verse 2:10, it says, God called the dry land earth, and the gathering of the waters he called seas, and God saw that it was good. By the way, the word there for earth is eretz, which I introduced yesterday. It's a Hebrew word which can mean a certain piece of land, like a crop or a plot of land you have for growing crops. It can refer to a nation, such as Zambia, or it can refer to the entire Earth's surface. In this case, it's talking about the land part of the Earth's surface, wherever land was, again, probably one large continent. And of course, the gathering of waters he called the seas, or bodies of water. And I notice here at the end of this verse, he uses the word good to describe it. This goes back to the day 1 account when God created light and separated the light. And he got done that first day, he said, and God saw that it was good. Interestingly enough, the day 2 account that I described yesterday does not use the word good. Why? That's interesting, it's not there, but it's not there. And many people have suggested that perhaps it's not finished yet. I'll talk more about what's going on day 4 in just a moment here, but I think the reason why God didn't describe the day 2 creation to be good is because it's not finished. Remember, good there is not so much an immoral statement as it is a statement of completion and also a statement of fulfilling its function. And since it's not completed yet, it can't fulfill all of its function yet, but it can. So this is the second time, third day, but second time the word good is used to describe what happened on that day. Now, the question is, what kind of rock was going on that first day? We'd say primordial rocks. The way we kind of see this is that we saw before on day 1, the earth was covered with water, very deep water, and then part of that water was taken up and away from the earth, so you're dividing the waters above and below. And then on day 3, God takes the waters below and separates them and forms dry land. As a dry land appeared. So what we think was happening on that day is underneath the waters you had a rocky surface to the earth that was covered with water, and certain portions pushed up like this, were shoved up, and as they did, they shoved up above the water. It's interesting, if we would take, the oceans on average, if you took the ocean depths on average, its depth would be close to 3 kilometers in depth. Actually more than 3 kilometers, not quite, 3.5 kilometers in depth. That's a lot of water, isn't it? And if you, the reason why we have continents sticking up is because the ocean depths are deep, and the continents stick up like this. They're higher levels, like plateaus. And so the water will drain down off of these plateaus and fill up those ocean depths. If you could push the ocean basins up and the continents down like this, so the rock on the earth is totally smooth, you would still have more than 2 kilometers of water depth completely around the world. Actually, 2.5 kilometers. So there's a tremendous amount of water on the earth's surface, and so it's very good that God saw fit to stick some portions up higher than other portions. You have high portions and low portions. And so what we think happened on day 3 is that God caused some portion of the rock beneath to shove upward, and the water drained off, revealing this large continent. And when you do that, you have to have a certain kind of rock there. Now, there are 3 basic kinds of rocks. Again, I'm not a geologist, but we study these. One is what we call an igneous rock. It's a volcanic rock. At least we think it's volcanic. It comes from, we think, from a molten state. And the second kind of rock is what we call a sedimentary rock, where sediments are laid down. You'll erode rock away, and you'll fill up on the bottom of water, be it a sea or a lake or something, layers upon layer of rock. And it can harden and solidify and turn into stone. And I don't know anything about the geology of Zambia, really, but you probably have some sedimentary rock somewhere. You'll see a road cut on these horizontal bands of rock going like this. Those are laid down by water. It's as if the world was completely covered with water at one time. We'll talk more about that later, why that's the case, biblically, of course, being the flood. Then the third type of rock is what we call sedimentary rock, metamorphic rock. And you can take one of the other types of rock and subject it to pressure and temperature, heat, and you can transform it into something else. For instance, there's a type of rock called limestone. It's a sedimentary rock. And if you heat treat it and pressurize it, it turns into marble, which is used oftentimes for sculptures and such. So what kind of rock is primordial? And again, I work for a geologist. He's my boss, and we've discussed it many times. And they think the original rock around the world was probably either granite and or schist. These are believed to be igneous rocks because they think they formed from a melt. And where I used to live, I lived in several different places in the United States. I spent most of my life in a region called South Carolina. Wonderful place, by the way. And much of that was covered with granite. We had granite all over the place. It's a very beautiful stone used for building buildings and things like this. But it's a bit of a mystery. I learned this probably 15 years ago from a geologist. If you take a lot of rocks and carve them up, and grind them up and melt them, and then let them cool, they turn back into the kind of rocks that they were. Basalt is one of those. If you've been to Victoria Falls, it's actually a basalt. It's a very dark rock, angular rock. And if you take basalt and you melt it down and let it cool, it turns back, usually back into basalt or something very similar to it. But if you take granite or schist, these are related rocks, and you grind them up and melt them and let them cool, you don't get granite or schist. Depending on how it cools, you get different kinds of rocks. And I was shocked when I learned this, but nobody in the world knows how granite forms. And granite is one of the most common rocks found on the continents. It's very quite surprising, really, that geologists don't know where granite comes from. And if we don't know where it comes from, that means we're not aware of any natural explanation for what granite is and how it came about. And if there is no natural explanation for something, what's left? A supernatural one. So that's part of the reason. There are other reasons too about the granites. And again, I'm not a geologist, so I can't go in detail on this. But they've come to the conclusion that these granites and schists represent probably, that's their model, that's their theory, probably represent the original rock that the continents were made out of. And here's a photo of me on the left and my son on the right. We took a raft trip together in Grand Canyon. Grand Canyon is this very large canyon in the United States. You've all heard about, I'm sure. And part of my job where I work, I go on a raft trip down through the canyon. During the daytime, we study geology. We have another person that's helping with doing most of that. But then at night, we stop and camp along the river. I take a telescope with me, and it's very dark there. The rocks kind of get in the way because they're down inside the canyon, but we can still see some of the sky. And we do astronomy. We call this geology by day, astronomy by night. We look at the same sort of things we were looking at the other night, except some of the part of the sky you see here we can't see. Well, one day of the trip we go up into what's called Blacktail Canyon. It's a slot canyon, which means it's kind of narrow. It's 5 meters wide, and most of this, it's not really wide at all. And it's probably 20, 30 meters high, at least, maybe higher. And at the bottom of this, there is a layer of granite and schist right there behind us. And they believe that this rock behind us probably is a creation day rock. So I go there and I set my hand down on it, and I'm thinking, you know, God specially made this on day 3. And that's really cool to do that. Now, above that is a layer here called the Tapeats sandstone, and that's the bottom sedimentary rock on Grand Canyon. And it's a very distinctive rock. It's found all around the world. It's found, have you heard of the city of Petra in Jordan? It's a city carved out of rock in a canyon. It's made out of the same kind of rock. They call it something else there, but it still is. And in between these two is a layer right here, and I'll show you a close-up here in just a moment. There's a layer between these two called the Great Unconformity. Now, an unconformity in geology is where there is time missing. That's what they would say. They would say that there's a rock layer here, and then you'd have another rock layer, and another rock layers laid on top of each other like this successively, and you see that in Grand Canyon, and they think that one layer followed another layer followed another layer. But the geologists here think that there was the bottom layer was laid down, and then the next layer was laid down. It was a vast period of time, in this case more than 1 billion years, they say, like 1.2 billion years of time between this layer right there. That layer is only about that thick. Now, we creationists don't view it that way, but take a look at that gap. Here's a close-up. There's the Tapeats sandstone above. There's the granite below, and in between you've got this layer, again, about that thick, and it's full of pulverized rock. These are little boulders, little tiny rocks. Some of the boulders are bigger, some are like this big. And the whole thing, wherever it's exposed in Grand Canyon, it's obviously a layer that has been sheared off. Some huge force came along and just tore the top layer of the rock off, and then rolled in the debris like this. But it's not only found in Grand Canyon. They find the same sort of structure in China. In fact, portions of that are mined to produce the materials they put into the hard glass on cell phones. They've also found it in South America. They've found it in Europe. They've probably found it in Africa. It's everywhere. And one geologist, he's not a creationist, he doesn't believe in the Bible, doesn't believe in the flood. Several years ago to a geology meeting, he gave a presentation on this great unconformity. By the way, last night, Johan showed a picture of Lyell's unconformity in Scotland. I looked at it. It's the same layer. The same layer. It's found in Britain as well. But this geologist at a meeting a few years ago gave a presentation on it, and he said it appears that there was a worldwide shearing event that laid down this layer. That's dynamite, really, because the evolutionists think that we have gradual processes going on all the time, and yet we look at it and we realize that there was a worldwide event that sheared off the rocks. We call it the flood. And so right here, we think that this is the first layer laid down as a result of the flood, and down below is that basement rock that God made on day 3. So Grand Canyon is a marvelous place to visit, and I know not everybody can go there. I feel very privileged to have gone there several times. And you can see, God's handiwork, and you can see God's judgment, His wrath there at that boundary, and you can place your hand on that boundary and reflect upon the fact that it's not a billion years of missing history. It's actually one of the most tragic things in history, because of the worldwide flood where God destroyed the entire world except for those aboard the ark. So anyway, the conclusion we've reached, it's a model, but it seems to be consistent with what the Bible tells us, is that the original rock was granite and schist. In this particular place, we're seeing that rock. We think. We're not entirely certain, but we think that's what it is. And then he continues in verse 11, he says, "And God said, let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees on the earth bearing fruit, after their kind, with seed in them. And it was so." A couple of things here. First of all, plants sprouted. God said, let the earth sprout this vegetation. This stuff came rising up out of the ground. And make note of that word, the earth sprout, that verb, sprout there. And also, it's the first use of the phrase, after their kind. We'll see this more later on in the next couple of days of the creation account. But God ordained that plants and animals reproduce after their kind. That is, if you take maize and you plant it, you're going to get wheat out of it, right? What are you going to get when you plant maize? Maize, okay. What if you plant barley? You're going to get wheat out of that, right? No, you're going to get what? If you plant maize, are you going to get barley?
No, maize.
You're going to get maize, aren't you? And so it goes. When you plant something, you don't get a different plant, do you?
No.
The things you plant are seeds from the plants. Those are reproducing. We eat a lot of the seeds, but we keep some back and we plant those. And so these plants reproduce after their kind. So if they reproduce after their kind, according to what God said, can you turn maize into wheat? Can you turn maize into barley? The only thing you can do is with maize is turn it into food, right? Maize stays maize, doesn't it? And ditto for all the other plants. So if that's the case, then that means these plants can't evolve, could they? There's a whole theory of where one plant evolved into another, and they try to say that all the plants we have today evolved from different types. But that's not what the Bible says. And if you scientifically study this, and it doesn't take a whole lot to study, you try planting maize, you'll find out every time you'll get maize, won't you? Anything you plant, you will always get the same thing coming up. So not only does the Bible tell us that, but science happens to agree with that. So why do many scientists disbelieve that and think that somehow maize could turn into something else? Because they believe in evolution, in spite of what the Bible says, and in spite of what good science says. Good science says evolution isn't possible, yet most scientists seem to believe in it. Does that make any sense to you? It doesn't make any sense to me, okay? Because again, science actually says otherwise. And it goes on in verse 12, it says, the earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed after their kind, and trees bearing fruit with seed in them after their kind. And God saw that it was good. So God repeated this. Again in verse 11, it says, God gives the command, let the earth sprout these plants. And in verse 12, it then says, and the earth brought forth these plants. Now, first of all, these plants were obedient to God's command. God gave the command, let these plants grow. And immediately they grew. God gives the command, it's an empowering command, it's a creative command, and they obey because He is Lord of all. Also, notice that we use the word good twice in this one day. And it said when the dry land appeared, God said it was good. When the plants appeared, God said that was good. The word good is used to describe the creation 6 times in the creation account. It's missing on day 2. It's almost as if on day 3 God used the word twice to make up for that deficiency. But the thing is, there are 2 distinct things that were made there. One is the dry land, and the other one was the plants. You see, the dry land was preparing things for the plants. You couldn't have the plants until the dry land appeared. For that matter, you couldn't have land animals until the dry land appeared. Now I want to introduce a concept I call process creation. Now I'm a little hesitant to use that term because there is a term out there called process theology. You heard that term, process theology? It's bad theology. They're basically, in process theology, they're trying to argue that God is learning. They're saying that the God in Genesis 1 and 2, he is not the same God in chapters 3, 4, and 5. And the God in the later historical books of the Old Testament is different from the God of Genesis. And the New Testament God's different beyond that. It's almost like a person or a human learning. And he learns from mistakes and so forth. That's called process theology. I am not peddling that, okay? I'm still trying to look for a different term here. That's the only term I've come up with yet. So if you have some suggestions, please give them to me. So I'm going to talk about what I'm tentatively calling process creation. And to illustrate this, I'll point out that, as I already said, I've alluded to this, it talks about God giving command in verse 11 for the vegetation to sprout or to grow. In verse 12, it says the plants did grow. And I don't know how many times I read that. The King James, it says, let the earth bring forth, and the earth brought forth. I read this thing hundreds of times over the years. I was quite surprised about 6 or 7 years ago. I actually looked up those verbs in verse 11 and 12. And I was stunned to find in the Hebrew 2 different verbs being used. Now I think when God, in the same context, uses 2 different verbs like that, He's probably trying to get your attention. It got my attention. I looked up the meanings, and the meanings overlap. Many times we have words, 2 or more words that can mean basically the same thing, and so they kind of overlap each other, not entirely, but largely, and they can be used interchangeably. Maybe that's part of the reason why He was doing it, for a little bit of variety or something. But it caused me to look at the meanings. And the meanings: produce, grow, sprout, shoot, thrust, are all possible meanings. So when I looked that up, I thought to myself, I sat back in my chair and I thought to myself, what happened on this day? If I would have been there and I were watching this, what might I have seen? And many people are thinking, that God said, let there be plants, and poof, there's a baobab tree there. All right, did I pronounce that right? Baobab?
Yeah.
Baobab?
Yeah.
How do you pronounce it?
Baobab.
Baobab?
Yeah.
Okay, you understand what kind of tree I'm talking about then?
Yeah.
All right? It's a big tree, at least at the bottom it is. And you got, I haven't seen, if you have oak trees here? Oak trees, of course, acorns.
The movie tree.
Yeah, we have in the valleys.
How big are they? Get very big?
Valleys.
All right. Because I've not seen any really big, tall trees. Where I come from, oak trees are some of the tallest, 30, 40 meters or more. They're big trees. They take a long time to grow. Well, from what I'm reading in these verses here, in verses 11 and 12, I'm picturing from the verbs being used, this little tiny seedling comes out of the ground. It shoots skyward like this. In the case of a baobab tree, it gets big like this. And leaves shoot out and fruit comes out at the end. How long would that take normally? Well, in the case of an oak tree, it might take a couple of decades. How long did it take at day 3? Certainly less than a day. Possibly only a minute or 2. Now they have these really nice time-lapse movies of plant growth. You ever seen them? They'll take a picture like every minute or so, and they'll put them together in a movie, and you'll see this plant shoot out of the ground and come up and wiggle around, and flowers will pop out. It takes like 2 weeks to do this, and you see it in 30 seconds. It's amazing how this works, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's what I'm picturing happening. Know why? Why did God have to have these things grow so fast? He could simply have them sprout and grow up the way they normally do. Well, this is on day 3, and in 3 more days, he was going to be making squirrels. You have squirrels here? Little rodents?
Squirrels, yes.
What do you call
Squirrels. I don't know what. Yeah,
Oh, squirrel.
Yes.
them? Squirrels? Yeah. And they have bushy tails, and they climb up the trees. And what do they eat? A lot of times where I live, they eat acorns.
Yeah.
The thing is, they eat stuff off a tree. That's why they climb up the trees to get them. Well, what if the trees aren't producing any fruit? What's going to happen to the squirrels? They'll die. For that matter, what did man in the garden eat? Did he eat meat? You're going to learn a little later on. They ate plants. Everybody ate plants. But if the plants aren't mature and the plants aren't producing fruit, everybody dies. Everybody starves to death, right? So the reason why God matured these plants is because they had to feed a lot of animals and man in just 2 to 3 days. And you couldn't wait 2 to 3 years for these things, or 2 or 3 decades. You had to have them mature very quickly. So God brought these things to rapid maturity. These 2 verbs denote rapid action, but not instantaneous creation. Not slow action, but not instantaneous, but rapid growth. That's what's coming out of the Hebrew words being used here. So that's what I mean by process. I alluded to yesterday the fact that God made Adam from out of the, I want to get this right this time, dust. I said dirt yesterday, and I was told be careful because around here dirt means rubbish, and that's not quite what was being used. It was dust, stuff on the ground God picked up and used. So we also find a similar pattern throughout the other days. As I said, the creation of man on day 6, the creation of animals on day 6 out of the dust as well. Swimming things out of the water on day 5. Again, a rapid action, not gradual, but not instantaneous, but not slow, but a rapid sort of process. And then it closes there on verse 13. The day 3 account says there was evening and there was morning, a 3rd day. And this is the 3rd time that evening and morning is used. Evening and morning referring to the beginning and end of the day, because in the Hebrew reckoning, daytime, the day begins and ends at sunset. So you go evening and then to morning, go from night to day. And that's the 3rd day of the creation. So we're halfway through the creation week, and so far we just have dry land and plants being visible. And then it picks up in 14, day 4. And by the way, this is my favorite day of the creation week, because an astronomer, finally they're getting to my stuff. And God said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and for years. And I talked yesterday about this firmament's a bad translation. I'm getting back to the King James here. The word is Rahia, and Shemayim is heaven. This is the Rahia of the Shemayim, and I think the fact that they're used together 3 times in the day 4 account reinforces that this is the thing I just made on day 2. I make this thing on day 2, this Rahia, or firmament. I call it heaven, and on day 4, in case you don't quite get it, I'm placing these bodies up in this thing, which further reinforces the idea that God made space on this day. What are the lights? Well, very clearly the lights refer to the sun, the moon, and the stars. And it's interesting that God didn't use the name the sun or the moon, did he? There's a reason for that. We'll talk about that more in just a moment. There are several purposes listed here. It says to divide the day from the night, to be for signs, be for seasons, and for days and years. So what are those purposes? Well, number 1, to divide day from night. I usually get up early. I got up this morning well before sunrise. It was starting to get light. As my usual routine at home, I got up and I walked around the building. I wanted to look at the sky and see what was up. I wanted to identify stars, and I saw, probably a dozen I could easily name. And I just it's a wonderful time of the day looking at all of that. I could see the belt of Orion rising over in the east. It's one of my favorite constellations. You can see it virtually anywhere in the world. Well, there's a division there. There are certain stars I see at certain times of the year which tell me it's about time to rise, and other times it's time the sun's going to set. When I'm outside sleeping under the stars, which I like to do when I'm camping, I can wake up, if I wake up in the middle of the night, I can look at the stars and I can tell what time it is. And if it's 1 a.m., I go back to sleep, or I try to, right? But if it's 5 a.m., I know it's going to get light soon. The sun's going to rise soon. So I think it's time to get up. I just get up at that point. That's one reason why I went outside. I want to see what time it was. Too lazy to look at my watch. The power was off anyway, so I couldn't see the watch. It was so dark. So it divides the night from the day, and of course, the sun is the big divisor there, but also the stars will help you figure that out. They're to be for signs. To be for signs. We'll talk more about those in just a moment. It says for seasons, and the Hebrew word there is moed. And I learned this over just the last 3 years, what this word means. I've read this many times, and I assume seasons referred to the climatic seasons. Where I come from, we have 4 seasons a year. We have spring, summer, autumn, and winter. Do you have basically 2 seasons here, winter and summer? Is that basic 4? You have 3? What are they?
Rain season, dry season, and cold season.
Okay, first one is
Rain season,
dry season,
cold season.
cold season. Okay, are we in the dry and cold now, or what are we in?
We're in the cold season.
We're in the cold season. When's the dry season?
Just after this.
Just after this. So this is the cold season. It'll be dry soon. It's already dry though, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's going to get drier.
cold season.
And then I know in your summer it gets rainy, right? Rains a lot, okay. But the thing is, we have these annual seasons. Wherever you are, someplace they have 2, some they have 3, some they have 4. Depends what your climate is. Your climate's different from mine by quite a bit. So we have 4 distinct, you have 3 distinct seasons. These are annual seasons caused by your climate, the tilt of the Earth's axis as we revolve around the sun. This is not what's being talked about here. For many years I read this and I thought that what it was talking about. It's not. The word moed there refers to the festivals that the Hebrews had. And those festivals, primarily, well, the biggies would be Passover and the Feast of Tabernacles. Okay, Passover was their big one, and it starts up in the spring, early in the spring. It's a commemoration of their bondage and then their release from Egypt. We'll go over this very quickly. By the way, when I taught the university, I used to talk about this dealing with astronomy, and I loved doing this because I was talking Bible to them. And nobody could complain because it was perfectly related to what I was talking about. Anyway, you can talk about this. Public schools, no matter what. At any rate, what's going on is they're in bondage in Egypt, have been for some time. God raises up Moses, their prophet. He says to go to Pharaoh and say, let my people go. And he goes to him, and Pharaoh hardens his heart. And he says, no, and the Lord sends a plague. And then he sends another plague, and he sends another plague. He sends 9 plagues. And Pharaoh just keeps hardening his heart. Finally, he sends the 10th plague. The one where the death angel goes to the land of Egypt. He slays the firstborn in every household. Except for the Hebrews. But how's the death angel known as the Hebrew there? Well, as it turns out, the Lord could figure that out. And he is the Lord of all, is he not? But there's an object lesson here for them. In order to make a sign, a covenant with God, they were to take a young lamb, and they were to slaughter that lamb and eat very quickly, cook it and eat it, take the blood, and they're supposed to drain the blood anyway, put it on a hyssop branch and splash it on the doorpost and the lintel of the door. Very bloody thing, but quite a sign on the door. They're to eat it with bitter herbs, with unleavened bread, because they're in a hurry, because they don't have time to let the bread rise naturally. You couldn't go out and buy a pack of the yeast, and you had to let it rise from the air, and that took a long time. Didn't have time. They were to put shoes on their feet and pack their bags. Why? Haste. The word was going to come that they were going to release that night. The death angel comes through Egypt, and as he does, he gets to the Egyptian's house. He sees nothing. He strikes death firstborn in each household. He gets to the Hebrews in the land of Goshen. He sees the blood, the covenant, the sign on the door, and he passes over them. Hence the name. And Pharaoh then relents, and they take off. Of course, there's a long story here. He changes his mind again, the Red Sea, the whole bit. They get into the wilderness. The Lord says, okay, we're going to have to commemorate this every year at this time of the year. This will be the first month of the year to you. Prior to that, they had this is in the spring, their year had started, what they call the civil calendar, still does start in the autumn, but this is going to be a religious ceremonial calendar. And he says, you will do this on the 15th day of the month. They kept a lunar calendar. We don't keep a lunar calendar anymore, but they did. What they would look for is a thin crescent moon in the evening sky. That would mark day 1 on their calendar. 2 weeks later, the 15th day, the moon would be full. And the reason why they did that is because on the Passover, they left on the night of a full moon. Remember, the night fell came. That's when the death angel arrived. They were told to leave then. Now, God's providence. Have you ever tried walking around outside with no lights on when there's a full moon? Have you tried that? How hard is it to do? Not very hard at all. You can see very well, can't you? I've done an experiment a few times driving. I don't suggest you try this, but I've done it a number of times. I'm driving on a country road. There's nobody around. The road's kind of straight. I can see if a car comes around the curve a kilometer or so, half a kilometer up the road. And I'm the only one on the road, and if the full moon is full, I turn my headlights off. And I can see well enough to stay on the road. Now, what I'm afraid of is somebody will come around the curve doing the same thing. And we might not see each other very well. So after a while, I'll turn the lights back on. And certainly if a car does come on the curve with their headlights on, I'll turn mine on. But I'll run 30 seconds sometimes. And I'm just looking around and just seeing how well can I see. And I can see very well. If there were no other vehicles on the road, I could drive quite safely at night. But there are other vehicles, so I'm a little more considerate than that. I never do that on a night when there's no moon out, or very little moon, because I can't see very well at that point. You see, in God's providence, the night they left Egypt, the moon was full, and they could see where they were going. They didn't need lights to take along with them. That's a point that many people miss, and I missed it for years. When I learned, I said, whoa, Pharaoh didn't plan that. Moses didn't plan that. Nobody planned it except God. God knew. And he knew that they would need lights in order to leave in the middle of the night. That's what they did. So the Passover is on the full moon every time it comes around. It's always a full moon. Well, how do they know when the full moon is? Well, they have to develop a calendar. And once you develop a calendar, you can anticipate when the next full moon will be, when the next full moon will be next year, when it's Passover. So and by the way, Pentecost was 50 days later, hence the name Pentecost. And then first fruits, and then you have in the fall tabernacles, or what put it in Hebrew, it's Sukkot. It's also on the 15th, starts on the 15th day of the month. And you have the Feast of Trumpets prior to that, and you have the Rosh Hashanah, the civil new year at that point. You have the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. It's on the 5th day of this civil month, first month. 6 months after Passover. The whole thing is, if you don't have a calendar, you have no idea when to observe these things. So the purpose there of the seasons is not to keep track of your 3 seasons or my 4 seasons or whatever. It's to keep track. The word moed there refers to the festivals that the Hebrews were to follow. So God's ordination there is to do this. By the way, we use the word season to refer to periods of time where something's accomplished. We have certain hunting seasons. I don't know if people hunt here much, but where I live, people like to hunt deer. It's a large antelope we have. People even hunt squirrel and eat it. They hunt pheasant, they hunt doves, turkeys, a few other animals they hunt. And there's certain times a year set aside for when you can hunt these animals. You can't hunt them just any time you want. There's certain times. We call it hunting season. And our sports, we have seasons for that. I'm sure you have football season here, don't you?
Yeah.
It's a certain time of year, and then when that's over, there's no football for a while, right? And then there's football again. Right now, where I live, it's baseball season. Y'all ever see baseball being played? You heard of baseball, right? I love baseball. It's baseball season. It's the middle of the season we have. So we use that word season, the moed, is a Hebrew word. We use those to describe other things other than our climate or annual seasons we get associated with the weather. Also, for days and years, we need to observe that. It turns out for agricultural purposes, you need to go with that. You need to plant things in certain times. It's important to get the planting done at the right time. Where I live with winter, you get into spring, it's time to start planting things in your garden, but you don't want to plant them too early. If it gets a little warm in late winter, if you went by the weather, you might plant too early. The plant comes up and then it gets very cold and it freezes the plants and kills them. If you wait too long, the plants don't develop in time. So you need a calendar to help you do that. And days and years would certainly do this. So that's the reason why, the other reason why we have a calendar is for agricultural purposes. Most of us are really removed from agriculture, but we're still tied to that calendar. Our school season, our school years and such are tied to that. Okay, what about these signs? So we can talk the signs in several ways. I think there are at least 4 distinct ways. One of them is dealing with weather. Now we have a statement in our culture, I don't know if it's used here or not, but it says, a red sky at night, sailor's delight. Red sky in the morning, sailor take warning. What this means, if the sky looks red in the evening, it means there's probably going to be good weather, fair weather for the next couple of days. But if you see red sky in the morning instead, that means that there's probably a storm coming. Do you have that in this part of the world, that statement?
No.
Not here? Okay, I wondered if it might be different. Well, as it turns out, they had a similar thing among the Hebrews, because in Matthew 16, verses 1 through 4, some of the leaders of the Jews came to him and they started asking him for a sign. And he said, your hearts are hardened. He said, you're asking for a sign. In fact, you know about signs. You look and you see that the sky is red in the evening and you know there's going to be good weather. And you look in the morning, you say there's going to be bad weather. Same sort of thing that I just quoted to you. But yet you can't even perceive the signs. So even up in the sky, you can see things that can give you some clues about the weather. You see clouds moving in. So there's some weather forecasting you can do using some of these signs. The heavens also can proclaim God's glory. Psalm 8, Psalm 19 readily come to mind. Psalm 19, 1 through 6. Psalm 8, the middle part, but really the whole psalm works. And of course, Romans 1, 18 through 20. And I believe Matthew, I think you talked about that. Did you or did you not? I can't recall. Somebody talked about Romans and the importance there, the signs that there, in the case of verses 18 to 20, talking about there must be a creator. And the signs will tell you that. In Matthew 2, we have the record of the Magi, the coming, and they come to Jerusalem and they say, where is this king born of the Jews? Because we have seen his star in the east. Boy, we wonder what that means. I can give a whole talk just on that, but that's not the time or place. So that's a sign. And then also we have apocalyptic signs. We have many prophetic passages that deal with distressing signs in the heavens. I'll give you several here right off. Isaiah 13, 9 through 13. Joel 2, 30 through 31. By the way, that's quoted again in Acts chapter 2 as well. There's Matthew 24, 29 to 31, the words of Jesus there. And of course, John in his Revelation chapter 6, verses 12 to 17. There are other passages. These are just ones that come to mind. If you read those, you will see distressing things like the sun withdrawing its light and the moon not shining, the stars not shining, the moon being turned to blood. These are cataclysmic things. Now, some people will try to argue that these are just eclipses, but eclipses of the sun and the moon happen more often than you might think. In my lifetime, I totaled it up recently, I've seen at least 13 total lunar eclipses. If these things were merely lunar eclipses, I've already seen them 13 times at least. How many times does the world have to end without an ending? So, I'm not really impressed with some preachers who want to make these eclipses. I think when you look at the entire passage it's in, the surrounding verses, these things are really distressing, perplexing. When they come, people will be shocked and they will be lacking explanation. An eclipse, that's pretty well understood. They're pretty, they're interesting, but I do understand what's going on there. I think when these things happen, we'll know it. We'll know that there's something really afoot here. So hold on. In the future, these things will come. So at least 4 different ways, biblically, that the heavenly bodies can indicate signs to us. Continuing in verse 15, he says, and let them be for lights in the firmament of heaven to give light upon the earth. And it was so. So we find here two more purposes given to us. One of these is to be lights in the firmament of heaven, just to be lights in the sky. I think there it's largely talking about the stars, but possibly the moon and the sun as well. And also to give light on the earth. And I've already talked about the fact that the moon can be very useful for producing light. During the daytime you can see very well because of the sun. It's lighting it better than any man-made light can do. The moon can do a very good job. And even with starlight, if you give yourself a chance, I probably startled the night watchman here a bit the other night. I got out at like 1 in the morning and I'm walking around the building. And I didn't know where he was, and he didn't see me coming, and all of a sudden, bam, there we were. He jumped, and I jumped. After he jumped. The thing is, my habit is to walk around by starlight. There were some street lights and stuff, I'm trying to avoid those. But I found if you let your eyes get dark adapted, it takes time. When I'm sleeping, my eyes are dark adapted because I got my lids closed. But if you go out on a totally dark night with no moon, no artificial lights, no street lights, no house lights, no flashlights, with no trees overhead like this, I can walk all around out here without stumbling on anything because I can see. It's feeble light, your eyes have to be dark adapted, it takes time. But as an astronomer, I love the dark skies. I'm telling people, people that from the northern hemisphere who are into astronomy are envious of a place like this. I come here and it's wintertime, it's not very hot, it's kind of chilly, but you put a jacket on, and I go outside and the sky is marvelous. Where I live, the sky is never this good. So I let my eyes get dark adapted. It's not just the thrill of seeing the stars, but it's also I can walk around and I can see just by the stars. So in verse 16 he says, "And God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night." He made the stars also. Okay, notice that the sun and moon are not mentioned by name here. And I don't think anybody reading this would figure it out. Hey, the greater light to rule the day, that has to be the sun. The lesser light, that has to be the moon. So why didn't the Lord simply say, He made the sun and He made the moon? Well, there's a very good reason for that. It turns out elsewhere He says moon and sun by name, but not in the creation account. There's a reason for that. The pagans around them viewed them as being gods. And apparently God did not even see fit, the true living God, to even recognize those pagan deities. We almost like saying, well, our God made your God. That'd be how some of the pagans around would interpret that. And those gods don't even exist. Okay? So he simply said, I'm not even going to mention their name. I'm just going to say that God made this great light. If you want to call that the sun, that's fine. I think sun is an Anglo-Saxon word. The Latins called it sol, S-O-L, and that's some people now have taken to calling the sun Sol. I don't like that because it turns out Sol was a god. Turns out other things like Venus and Jupiter and Saturn, they were gods too. We're kind of stuck with that. As are days of our week, Monday, Sunday, Tuesday, Wednesday, those are all names of gods in Germanic mythology. I've toyed around with trying to chuck that and simply saying that this is the fourth day of the week. That would be biblical, wouldn't it? Maybe a little too literal, but we got to give it some thought. I have to stop and think, okay, what day is this? It's Wednesday. Today is Wednesday, right? So this does make this the fourth day of the week. Oh, best day of the week because it's a memorial to when God made the stars, isn't it? And mentioning the stars, this always frustrates me a little bit because that's what as an astronomer, I primarily study stars. We specialize in astronomy, and my specialty is stellar astronomy. That makes me a stellar astronomer. All right? So it takes a moment to get that one. All right. But the thing is, they're barely mentioned. I understand in the Hebrew what it literally says in the Hebrew. If you translate it word for word for word, it doesn't say, He made the stars also. What it says is, the stars also. There's not even a verb or subject associated with it. Just like a little phrase at the end. To make sense in English, you have to put in the subject, which is God, He at this point, and the verb made. So the stars also, poof, that's it. The things I'm really interested in are mentioned almost as an afterthought. Oh, by the way, Danny, I made the stars on day 4. That's basically what he's saying to me. You can try to figure the rest of that out as best you can. You know. Well, Not to be flippant about it, but I find that a little frustrating because it doesn't give me a whole lot of detail to work with, because as an astronomer, as a scientist, I'm trying to develop a theory, a biblically based creation theory of astronomy. And the Lord's not giving me a lot of material to work with here. At the same time, it gives me some freedom, I guess, to look at some things. Anyway, it's a little frustrating for me on all of this. And it goes on to say that God set them in the firmament of heaven. There he mentions the firmament of heaven again, to give light upon the earth. And there's repetition. Firmament of heaven is mentioned here a third time, and also a purpose to give light upon the earth. These things, their purpose is repeated, and so when something's repeated, reiterated, it's probably important to make sure you get it, in this case, unless there's any confusion on the matter. So the emphasis is importance, perhaps, significance, trying to get a message to you. Not sure, but it gets my attention. It's mentioned again. Again, firmament of heaven is, or expanse of heaven, or the rakia of Shemayim is mentioned 3 times in this one-day account, 4th-day account. And so that's the 3rd time it appears in just on the day 4. Again, emphasizing what I think, that this is the thing that God made on day 2. And so I think this kind of confirms my contention I shared with you yesterday about what I think is going on day 2. And again he repeats, and to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness, and God saw it was good. Again, you get repetition here, the division purpose of these, and the ruling purpose as well. I guess I left that off, both to rule and to divide the light from the day, the night from the day. And also ruling is given here. I'm sorry, I didn't repeat. It's a new purpose given. It wasn't really given as ruling before. And then the astronomical world, getting ready to conclude this day 4 account, he says that he declared it to be good. The 4th time, and it was good, or God saw that it was good, is declared. Again, there's a moral component perhaps, but more importantly, one of completion and one of fulfillment of purpose at that point. And it concludes in the evening and the morning, or the 4th day. The 4th time this construction appears, evening and morning, suggesting once again a normal period of time, normal day, not billions of years, but a normal day. And the 4th day also, when you number the days, usually in Hebrew, I don't think this has been mentioned yet, when the numbers days are numbered, it means it's a normal day. I think this occurs several hundred times in the Old Testament, and every time it refers to a normal day. There's one exception, I think in Hosea, that people try to point out, but actually it does refer to a normal day there as well. It looks like at first it doesn't. When you study it, it actually does. So with that one supposed or suggested exception, it does always mean ordering of normal days. That's the end of the 4th day. And has the same ending as I said. Okay. A couple of difficulties in conclusion here. I want to address a couple of difficulties we have. A couple of questions that come up. And I'm a little surprised no one's asked the question yet, but I'm not talking about astronomy that much since I've been here. Difficulty number 1. Where did the light come from on day 1? Because the sun was made on day 4 and the light was there on day 1. God said, let there be light, and there was light. So people say, well, for the first 3 days, where did the light come from? And some people try to argue that the sun was there all along, and that for some reason God just, we didn't see the sun for some reason. Some people suggest the Earth's surface was covered by thick clouds. It would not allow the light to come through. Now, the light would come through, but diffused light. It wasn't until the 4th day that the clouds cleared, and you could actually see the sun for the first time. That's not what the day 4 account says. It doesn't say, and God said, let the expanse be clear so we can see the sun for the first time. It doesn't say that. It says he made them at that point. You have to do tremendous disservice to the Hebrew text and even the English translations of this Hebrew text in order to get that conclusion. In fact, it's not a conclusion at all. It's a matter of coming to Scripture saying, we know from science the sun came first, and so therefore, how can we read the Scripture this way? That is a classic example of eisegesis. Eisegesis, reading into passages what you want it to mean. And we should approach the Bible with exegesis in mind. What does the passage say? What meaning can I pull out of this? So, I think the sun did not appear until day 4. It didn't exist until day 4, so we've still got this problem. We can't explain it away by appealing to billions of years and trying to rearrange the order. That does too much disservice to the Scriptures. So, the honest answer is, we don't know. There was some source of light, or maybe it was miraculously created light, I don't know. But God did not seem to didn't think it's sufficient or necessary to tell us. A question we can ask him when we meet him one day. But people can speculate, and if people want to speculate, it's fine as long as you make it clear it's speculation and it's consistent with Scripture as much as possible. It doesn't contradict Scripture directly, I'll put it that way. The problem I have is when people speculate many times, they then make that speculation truth. No, that's not the way it works. You speculate something and keep it consistent with Scripture and not contradict Scripture, and maybe it's true. One speculation people have, and by the way, I would not argue against this, I think it's the best answer, other than we don't know, and that would be God himself was the source of light. And they point out that in Revelation 21, 23 through 25, there's a statement made there that in the new city, the new earth, there will be no need for the sun and the moon because the Lord himself will be the light. You know, Jesus referred to himself as the light of the world. When Jesus said that, however, he was speaking metaphorically. It wasn't like there's a big searchlight on his head. There was a torch there, brightening up things. No, people understood when they read him, he's not saying literally, I am a light. He was speaking metaphorically. But in Revelation 21, it seems to be literal at this point. God himself, Jesus himself, will light that city for us. And again, John 1:5 starts off by saying, God is light. Again, there it's a metaphorical thing. But again, Revelation makes it literal in that case. And there's no two ways about it in Revelation. I know John 1 is metaphorical, but Revelation 21 is not. It is a literal light being said there. So just keep that in mind. Metaphor and literal. John 1 is not the good text to support that, but Revelation 21 definitely is. Well, we don't know. But that's, again, the best answer other than I don't know. Okay, the second difficulty I want to at least address briefly here is what we call the light travel time problem. This is a question I get all the time. I'm surprised no one's asked this question. Here I have a photograph of a galaxy. I can't remember the name of it. 2 galaxies, actually. They're interacting with each other. They're kind of messed up, as it turns out. The way they're kind of bent and shuffled around like that. This galaxy, these 2 galaxies, are over 300 million light years away from us. Now, we kind of measure distances with time in astronomy. And we do the same thing. How far away is Lusaka? How much?
350 kilometers.
Okay, you want to give me a different answer, a different way?
Sorry.
How far?
Lusaka?
Yeah, how far?
No, it's just 350.
No, you missed my point.
It's about 3 to 4 hours drive.
3 to 4 hours, right? Okay, when you ask that question, will you really say how many kilometers, or will they say at the time? You do it both, won't you? And you understand, because if you say it's 350 kilometers, that's an actual linear distance. But if you say it's 3 or 4 hours, most people will understand you're talking about getting there by car, right? If you're riding a donkey cart, it's going to take a little longer, isn't it? Yeah. If you're walking, it might take even longer, okay? So when we say a distance away, somebody says, oh, it's an hour away, what we mean is if you get in your car, you drive there, it'll take you an hour to get there. You all do that here as well? Mm-hmm. We do it all the time back home. In fact, more often when you ask somebody how far away a city is, they will tell you in hours of driving. They won't tell you anything else. Well, we don't drive cars in space, but there is something that does move through space. It's light. Light moves very fast. How fast is it? About 300,000 kilometers per second. You'd take about, in a second's time, light would go around the Earth entirely 7 times. The moon, it takes like 1 1/3 seconds for light to get to the moon. I looked at the moon this morning. I'm looking at the moon as it appeared a second, a third earlier than that. If the moon suddenly went out, or something happened on it like an explosion, I wouldn't know about it for 1 1/3 seconds. The sun out there, that light left the sun almost 8 minutes ago. So if the sun suddenly just blinked out, they did what's it called, load sharing on the sun. all right? You call it load sharing, right? When you turn the power off. So if they did load sharing on the sun, it would take you 8 minutes before you knew about it, wouldn't you? The nearest star, I pointed it out last night to people, the night before, is Alpha Centauri. It's more than 4 years away by light. We say it's 4 light years because it took the light that long to travel here. Yes?
Just a question before you go further. On the issue of light, what separated the day and the morning before light was created?
Well, actually, light was created on day 1. And so you're saying evening and morning. I guess it would be dated really from when light appeared. I don't know. I never thought about that much. But the evening and morning are not mentioned until after light exists and God separates the light and the dark. So you don't have evening and morning until after light is here. Good question. Good question.
All right.
Alpha Centauri, over 4 light years away. Many of the stars you see at night are hundreds of light years away. Hundreds. But this galaxy here, by the way, a light year, the Alpha Centauri, the nearest star, it's about 40 trillion kilometers. Would you rather hear 40 trillion kilometers or 4 light years? No, I think 4 light years makes more sense, doesn't it? These 2 galaxies are more than 300 million light years away from us. And some galaxies now we know about are 10 or 12 billion light years away from us. All right. The name of this is NGC 4676, 300 million light years away. And by the way, there's evidence of an interaction going on between the 2. Just a little sideline. Okay, that information is not important. Here's what's important, the question. How can we see these objects that are millions or billions of light years away if the world is only 6,000 years old? I mentioned yesterday in my first talk that the genealogies in the Bible suggest the world is only thousands of years old, not millions, not billions. And so people ask the question, how can we see these if the universe is very young? You'd think that we wouldn't see these 300 million light year away distant objects for another 3 million years, roughly. 300 million years. Well, the situation is actually even worse. How far away did I say the nearest star is, Alpha Centauri? It's 4 light years, right? More than 4 light years. So at the end of day 6, God makes Adam on day 6. The sun sets, it's getting dark, it's now day 7, isn't it? It's day 7. Adam lies down in some soft grass and he looks up in the sky. The sun is set, the sky is getting dark. He sees the moon, maybe. What else does he say? He saw stars. Why did he see stars? Could those stars fulfill their functions if they weren't visible? They couldn't. God had pronounced them good. At the end of the creation week, he said it was very good. And that means more than moral goodness, it means completion and fulfillment of purpose. So if those stars were not visible, they could not fulfill their purposes and their functions, and hence they could not be very good, could they? So I am convinced thoroughly, at the end of creation week, Adam saw stars. He didn't have to sit there and wait 4 years, 3 months, and so many days. Oh, Eve, look at that. There's a star. All right? And then another 5 years later, there's another star. No, it didn't happen one at a time like that. He saw the whole thing. In fact, he probably saw the sky pretty much the way we see it today. Because they need to fulfill their functions. So what did he see? He saw stars. And again, their functions demand that they be visible. If you can't see them, they can't do their function at all, can they? So, I suspect, yeah.
What would be the size of the stars, length and width?
Size of the stars, what?
The length and the width. The stars.
The dimensions of the stars.
Dimensions of the stars. Good question. The sun is about 1,400,000 kilometers across. That's the diameter of the sun. 1,400,000 kilometers. or 1.4 million kilometers. That would be the best way of writing it. That's the size of the sun. And that's more than 100 times the size of the Earth. And more precisely, 100 times the diameter of the Earth. In fact, more precisely, it's 109 times the size of the Earth. So if you've got the sun sitting here, you could put 109 Earths edge to edge across it. If you imagine the sun being a basketball,
Yes.
the Earth is about the size of a BB, about 2.5 millimeters across. So the sun's a lot bigger than the Earth is. Alpha Centauri is a bit bigger than the sun. It's like a basketball, a little bigger than a basketball. So on this scale, some of the stars would be bigger than this building. If the sun is a basketball, some of the stars would be bigger than this building. So stars are very big. All right, that answer your question? All right, so we worry about, at the end of creation, 6,000 years later, how we can see the most distant things in the universe. But we should be asking ourselves the question, how did Adam see things at the end of day 6, beginning of day 7? And I suspect if you can answer that question, the other question kind of answers itself at that point. So let's look at it from the beginning of creation, not at the end of creation here. There are several possible solutions. I know of at least 5 solutions to this problem that creationists have proposed. Let me share with you my solution, because I think it's the best one, all right? But I'm biased. Remember I pointed out that plants rapidly matured on day 3. I referred to this as process creation, not process theology, but process creation. Genesis 1, 11, and 12. And they had to do this. They had to be matured very rapidly in order to fulfill their functions. God didn't just poof them into existence. He matured them very quickly. I also pointed that rakia, by the way, man was made through a process, and animals were, and so forth. Rakia is better rendered expanse, and I think that refers to the atmosphere and space. The division of waters on day 2 helps us understand that. Also on day 4, this is interesting, I didn't mention this yet, but on day 4, God consistently uses the verb esa, which means to make, rather than the verb bara, to create. On day 4 account, he didn't say he created the heavenly bodies, he said he made them. That suggests the possibility that God made them a little different, just not poof, but made, created the matter or swirled the matter together and formed them very quickly through a rapid process. Again, not gradual, not evolutionary, but very rapid on day 4. And then, so God uses the processes to do this. And creation from dust, and plants rapidly matured on day 3. So I suggest that God rapidly formed the planets and the sun and the moon and the stars and everything in the astronomical world. He created them on day 4, made them on day 4, but then he matured the light. Think of how he brought the plants up out of the ground very rapidly. Let the earth bring forth, sprout, shoot, thrust these plants up so they could mature very quickly. I think what God did is he created these distant stars, even close by stars like Alpha Centauri, and God brought that light forth and brought it to the earth very rapidly. Very rapidly. So he brought the light rapidly to fulfill their function, just like he did process creation throughout the creation week. And he brought it here miraculously. And that's the neatest thing. And I'll close with this. I have suggested this to my astronomer and physics friends who are creationists. And they don't like my idea. And the reason why they don't like the idea is because it's not scientific, it's not physical. I'm not writing equations and trying to say this is how it happened. They're looking for equations, and I must confess, I've looked for equations for over 30 years. I was looking for a scientific answer to this. And my approach now is, well, what part of Creation Week don't you understand? Creation, by its very nature, is miraculous. Dust doesn't form into people. Plants don't sprout out of the ground without seeds. All these things happen because God brought them into existence miraculously and rapidly. Brought them into existence. You may as well offer a natural or physical explanation for the virgin birth and the resurrection of our Lord Jesus Christ. No one looks for those, at least if they are, there's something wrong with them if they do, because we accept this as God's miraculous creative acts that he did. So why should the creation week be any different? So even though my creation science friends the scientists don't like this explanation, and I didn't at one time either, I think I've had a burden lifted from me in the last 6 or 7 years, and I like this. And it's really strange that a scientist is up here telling you a non-scientific explanation for something. But hey, we have a powerful God, and he's not bound by what we call science. In fact, he's Lord over all, and he can intervene and change as he wishes, and we call these miracles, and we should not, as Christians, have a problem with this. Well, thank you very much. That concludes my talk on days 3 and 4.